Welcome to Identified.
Family to me are those who don't have to agree with on anything. There's that shared experience that won't ever go away and that you hold for a lifetime. There's this one person in my life who I consider her family, and I will never forget. I just showed up. I was like Steve from Full House, going in their fridge and eating their food when their mom passed away. I was just I'm gonna take care of these kids. And I just will never forget that, their dad was just just be with my kids and here, let me pay for your food budget now, you know? And just I could just be want to go to this, want to do this. And those two kids are my family. They're not kids anymore. He's got kids. She's getting married this year, but they're my family and they always will be.
Hello, I'm Nabil Ayers, author, music executive, and host of Identified, the podcast that delves deep into the complex world of family and identity. In this episode, my guest is the activist Nelini Stamp. In our conversation, we delve into Nelini's upbringing, navigating life with a large but disconnected network of half-siblings on her father's side, contrasted with the tight-knit community of her mother's Puerto Rican family. She reflects on how her family history is intertwined with the cultural and political landscapes of Belize and Puerto Rico, shedding light on the incomplete and often mysterious narratives passed down through generations. We touch on themes of race, class, and identity, and how these experiences have molded her perception of family and belonging. As you will hear, for Nelini, family is so much more than just blood. Here's my conversation with Nelini.
I have a very interesting family dynamics where on my dad's side, I'm one of four. Mm-hmm. We all grew up within miles of each other, but don't really know each other. The four of us have only been in a room once together. And we're all sisters. And one is actually, my sister is a year older than me.
I was going to assume that you're far apart in age, but you're
some
close.
Of us. I mean, it's in 50s to I'm 36 this year. 37. I don't know what age I am anymore. After 30, I stopped counting. No, but we are in a 20-year range, but the oldest and the bottom three, the three of us are closer, but I'm closest to the oldest.
Okay.
So on my dad's side, I don't really know because my dad is from Belize. He was also, it's actually very common that you have one similar parent with all your siblings and then different.
In Belize, that's the...
Yeah, it's just similar. I don't know why culturally or whatever, but I was yeah. We all have half siblings. Huh. I only talked to my grandmother once ever before she died. She died at 100 years old, 2 weeks after her 100th birthday. And then my dad never knew his father. I just found out, so my Aunt Grace, who is a famous educator in Belize City, died 2 years ago, lost a life battle with cancer. And I found out through watching the live stream of her funeral that my grandmother was actually born in Honduras. So all this time I thought my grandmother was born in Belize and that she was Afro-Belizean and all this stuff.
Right.
Turns out she's Afro-Honduran, which it took me years to actually admit I was Afro-Latino because Belize is such a weird identity in Latin America.
And did that change?
And Puerto Rican, but my Puerto Rican side is mostly light skin. I'm sure there's lots of mixture of things there. It really stops with my grandmother and my, I don't even know my dad's name. He doesn't, he won't talk about him.
Wow.
He will refuse to. My sister
So you didn't get stories as a kid?
I did not get, I barely know stories about his siblings. He's, I think, the last surviving one now because he's about 13 years older than my mother. So my dad's almost in his 80s. My mom is in her about retirement age this year. So I don't know anything about that. My mom did Ancestry.com before that stuff was really cool.
Yeah.
When we had internet, 2002 or whatever.
Oh, wow.
When Ancestry.com first came out, she's this is our coat of arms from Spain. And I was I was because my
is that accurate?
Yeah, my grandparents both grew up in rural Puerto Rico. My grandfather was a jibaro.
This is your mother's side.
My mother's side, my maternal side. And that's the family I grew up with. I grew up mostly Puerto Rican culture, all that stuff. Like my dad's around. Like the last time I saw him was my grandfather's funeral in 2017. So like I don't see my dad a lot. And my sister I just saw for the first time since 2017 too. I took her to Universal Studios a few weeks ago, to be honest.
That's a nice thing to do with
yeah,
your sister.
Yeah. It was nice. She lives in South Carolina now for lots of other reasons. And I was like, you need friends. So I'm going to come down to Florida. I was in Florida for the time. So my mom did there was a couple things that she told me, but really didn't resonate until years later I started doing activism. She said that my great ancestor, there's somebody in our family lineage that helped sew the Puerto Rican flag. But the Puerto Rican flag is a real political thing because is it the Americanized Puerto Rican flag, which is the one that most people know.
Right, especially as a New Yorker. That's the one that I'm picturing right now,
And that's like basically the Cuban flag inverted colors, right?
Okay.
Or is it the like independence flag of Puerto Rico from the Grito de Laras, which is the Dominican flag in inverted colors. We don't have our own.
Okay, so neither one's super original. But she sewed something.
She sewed something.
The first something.
First, some sort of Puerto Rican flag. Okay. But it's also very political because, like, if she sewed the Puerto Rican flag, that was the more like that flag was actually built here. And so I'm like, we didn't have anybody go to New York until my grandparents. So I was like, maybe it's the other more radical, cool tradition.
And you don't know which flag.
I don't. To this day, I don't. And so that's like really the lineage that I know of is that like, but my grandfather was so funny. He was like he would say, I'm Indio, which means in my mind was like Indian. But like I thought from India, like and my name is actually Indian. Nalina is lotus flower in Sanskrit. And my dad because he's from Belize, that's like he was born in British Honduras. It wasn't independent. So a lot of the Commonwealth countries, live in each other's countries.
Right.
So anyway, on my mom's side, my grandparents, my grandfather was like, I'm Indio. I didn't realize till years later he was trying to say he was Taino. But I also don't know if I believe that because a lot of Tainos were killed. And I don't say that in like a happy way. I'm just like, I don't know if this is true.
There's so much incomplete information.
It's so much incomplete information. And there's a lot, but like I didn't know my grandfather's real name until after he passed. They showed me his birth certificate and I said, who is Angel? And they're like, that's your grandfather. I was like, his name is Nelson. And they were like, yeah, that's his middle name. I was like, so all this time,
could have told
I had no idea. So I don't really know super much. And like, I've been wanting to try to find out. I think the thing that to me is that it's like, do I want to try to push my dad to talk about anything that he knows, just like information he can give me that's not too personal? I don't know, because we don't have that relationship yet, right? And on my mom's side, my mom has a bunch of stuff, so I can go through that. But I think it's very much, she was really proud of like the Spanish part, because that relationship with Spain and some of these colonies that they had is really complicated. And so I'm kind of like, are you sure all of that is that? She was like, yeah, we have Italian in our blood. And I was like, what? And so I just I have no idea in terms of like that far back. But I do know, like I grew up with my great grandmother who died at 99 years old.
Oh, okay.
And I was like 6 years old when she passed. So she had told me just stories.
Right. Okay. So you got some stuff from her.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was deadly accurate. Yeah.
Whether or not it's accurate. It was a lot of stories that, like, I think when I was a kid, that's why I was like, oh, I'm going to make movies about this.
Right. And that stuff's so interesting because especially the sort of cultural background and race and thinking you're one thing. I mean, my mother always told me that my father was part Native American. And I was always like, look at your cheekbones. When I had lunch with my father that day, I remember him saying, kind of looking at me and saying, oh, you got the cheekbones, like kind of like, whoa, we have this. And I was like, in a way I had this whole like, okay, so he's not denying he's my father. Like all that was in my head, which I didn't expect, but still that was kind of what that meant to me. And then when I did 23andMe, there's like 0.00% Native American. I was like, interesting.
Yeah, they tell, I mean, people
it's obviously
tell
been like a thing on his side of the family, but it's not.
Yeah, people tell tales. I mean, my great grandmother used to be like, we're Italian, and she used to be like, Sei was her last name. She was like, that's, and I was really confused because I didn't know where Alvarado came from, because that's my mom's last name and my grandfather. And then what's hard about my grandmother too, which I forget to say, I talk so much about my grandfather, is that she's actually and officially also known as, like, you can actually be an AKA, not the sorority, in the United States. So my grandmother was born Raimunda Maldonado, and she has a birth certificate and a social security number under that name. She was sold on the street to a black woman, which is, she says, I'm the reincarnation of. She was named Sinaida and had a new birth certificate and so she has two identities, like legal identities, to social security. So that, when I found out that, because they would say like, oh yeah, Raimunda, like my grandfather, when he was mad at her, he'd be like, Raimunda.
And
I was like, who is that?
That is
I was
wild.
like, I think Abuelo's losing his mind. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I was like, he's calling her Raimundo. My mom was like, yeah, that's her name. And I said, what? And then I asked my grandmother to tell me the story, and she did. Now, she said she was sold on the street for a chicken and a goat. Her children have said that is not true. She was definitely sold on the street, but not for a chicken and a goat.
Oh, wow.
That was her little spice on it.
Yeah. So where did you actually grow up, and with which parents?
Yes. I grew up in Carroll Gardens and, in Carroll Gardens and Staten Island and, with my mom. So it was my mom. And also family was always really different to me because when I was about 7, my mom came out as a lesbian. My grandparents disowned her for about 2 years, but they were my primary caretakers. So she still had to drop me off there. They just wouldn't verbally
Staying
communicate.
with your grandparents, okay. Yeah.
So they raised me. They were like, I went to school at PS 58 on Smith Street. They lived 2 blocks away. They would pick me up. She would call the house. They wouldn't talk to her. They'd just be like, your mom's outside. That was like the relationship for a while. I knew that family wasn't just blood family very early because my mom had this whole community of who I call now the lesbian mafia, of women that included her ex-husband's sister, who was like, her ex-husband's sister was like, you were a gay. Like, seriously, that's it. She was like, I don't know why you're married to my brother. It's all of these women that kind of grew up as like my aunties. And my mom also, I didn't realize this until later in life, but like I did realize that she really built, that's why she goes on vacation with those people. Those are her family.
Right.
They took her in a time where her family didn't want her. And they're all fine. My mom lives above my grandmother now. We're good.
Oh, wow.
Like,
it took a couple of years.
It just took a couple years. And, and I think that they also did it because I was still like, it was like, how is this sustainable when she's going to get older?
Right.
I always saw family as more than your blood. It was really the people who took care of you.
Right.
The people who were there for you. The people who are there for you at your best and your worst. And so I learned that from a very, very young age. But I grew up with my mom's side.
Right. And that was in Carroll Gardens, or that was in Staten Island?
Carroll Gardens and Staten Island. So Carroll Gardens was like ages born until 10.
Okay.
Staten Island 10 till 20.
Oh, but that's
Literally
interesting.
split
And
down the middle.
I made a huge move at the same age from New York City to Salt Lake City.
Whoa.
Which is wildly different. But I mean, Carroll Gardens to Staten Island is closer,
yes.
but it's not, it's wildly different.
Yes,
so
yes.
I'm curious.
Wildly different.
Obviously, it sounds like your mom had this amazing community, and that wasn't, you had a good childhood in Brooklyn. Was it the same in Staten Island, or was it totally different?
It was really
there?
different. So the woman that raised me as my mom's child, my mom was with somebody for 10 years of my life. She was very emotionally abusive to both my mom and I. And she moved us to Staten Island. That's where she was from. And she was a Wall Street banker. All of these things that I kind of fight against these days. But Staten Island, I was just like, whoa, there's a lot of white folks. Like where I was living, where they moved me to.
Right. I don't know it very well, but
it was West Brighton, very Irish neighborhood. How it was, it's way different now because of people being pushed out of New York and all that stuff, or Brooklyn and stuff but it was really like the North Shore was more working class, more diverse in terms of race. And the South Shore was always kind of like more white. Staten Island has a working class mentality, which is why I love it. Like no matter if you're rich. So there's like a part of me that's like, yeah. Like they tried to build Walmart there when I was little, and there were all these signs like no like they beat Walmart before Walmart tried to come to
that's
Brooklyn.
amazing. Wow.
And so like it did actually teach me a lot of stuff that are in my values today. Like I have a working class mentality regardless of what class I am, right? It's how I live my actual life.
Yeah.
And so, but Staten Island was really weird to both. So I'm growing up not only in a more conservative place, but I have 2 moms.
Yeah. And you're like a really short ferry ride from this totally other world where you lived.
And I went to LaGuardia High School. So I took the ferry every day for high school to this performing arts high school. But it was still, right? Like there was class dynamics, there was all those dynamics, but it was way more diverse. And, so I was living in these 2 worlds of like going to LaGuardia
like
during the day. In the same day and being in Staten Island at night. But it was really rough. I mean, like I remember it's something that I like wrote down if I ever write my story down, but I was wearing a North Face bubble coat, which is now back in fashion. And somebody said, just like if it was like just a Tuesday and that it just flew out of their mouth. I was like picking up my friend from Catholic school or whatever. And she was like, oh, my mom told me never to talk to Black people in North Faces. And I remember being like, did I just hear? Like, I was just so stunned.
Wow.
And
That's such a specific thing to not do.
It was such a specific thing. I was like, wait, what? Like, I was like, really? But I was like, I mean, I forgot I was wearing a North Face, to be honest, because I was like, this is just ridiculous. Like, you hear racist stuff. You hear, and I heard, especially it's the 90s, I heard a lot of like anti-LGBTQ stuff, post-AIDS epidemic, right? Like, you're gonna hear that. But this was, I was like, excuse me, it was so wild.
Yeah.
So, but that was like kind of what Staten Island was like. But it was really hard for me because to me, Staten Island was like, there was this, and it still to this day has one of the biggest places in my heart because I think of the working class mentality, because there was when I went to LaGuardia, I knew exactly what class I was in.
Right.
I knew exactly, when I went to Manhattan, I knew exactly where I belonged. In Staten Island, I was like, ooh, I could be on a boat with somebody. I could be on, you know what I mean? Like you could actually, you could go through class in a different way.
Right.
And because I had like, what I say, like my white friends who were my protection, I got into spaces, right? And so like, that was the weird part about it, is just like, it stood out to me, but class never did.
Right, but this is real. I mean, the term code switching gets thrown around a lot, but you were really like doing it all day, right?
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Like, if we think about the time period, so my fourth day of high school was September 11th, which was insane. I learned a lot about grief and things like that because Staten Island lost the most people. So I was living in Staten Island.
Oh, right,
and so also that was also a transformative experience where a bunch of people were like going to, because I still went to Brooklyn a lot. That's where my family was, right? And I did the Triborough for me, know, thing. But there was such a community after September 11th, and it was just so real. And there was like that community camaraderie. Like my friend still texts me every September 11th, and she's just, and we barely talk. And she's like, I remember when, we didn't know if we were going to go home that day, or we didn't know what was going to happen. Oh, wow. To me, there is this like, I have this like, but it was funny because it was the time of like Nelly. Everybody wanted to call me Nelly on Staten Island, and I said absolutely not. That's like not a nickname. What? I go by like because of.
You mean Nelly the rapper?
Yes, it was.
You don't look like Nelly.
I know, but it was just my name is Nelini. And because my name is Nelini. Oh, right. Nelly. Oh yes.
Oh my God.
So it was crazy because actually, like, I'm a big nerd, but MO that I got in Staten Island was like, I'm a tough girl. I fight. I didn't fight. People were afraid of me. And people were like, oh yeah, Nelini, like I would get people be like, oh, can I borrow your clothes? Like there was this, people wanted to be black in the suburbs so bad at that time because of the hip hop, and shiny hip hop was that time, right?
And Staten Island, I mean, it's kind of in it.
Right, and Staten Island was in it too. And so exactly, I mean, Wu-Tang, obviously, and if you grow up in Staten Island, you see Wu-Tang Clan. Like I was like, no, crazy. You really do. Like I multiple times have I been to the movie theater and Ghostface is there. Multiple times, like when I worked at Party City, Method Man came in and they were like, Nelini, we're sending you to take care of Method Man and his kids.
Right, he's gonna buy some streamers for the party.
No, he bought his kids. I mean, we actually fought about his daughter's outfit because he was like, that skirt is too short. I'm not putting her in it. I was like, I don't know what else. We actually went in a back and forth. So he actually got his kids clothes, like costumes, because they're real Staten Islanders. Like they are like, that's ride or die, which I do love. And so, so you have it, Staten Island's in it. Staten Island has a voice. And it's like, I feel like a lot of us black folks who had very close proximity to white kids that were allowed to go to the white kids parties that were also like, it was like cartoonish, but it was also like, how can I be like, it was like, we were little gods that it was this weird thing. It was like, you're racist, but yet if I, like, you would never fuck with me if I could say,
I sort of had that in Salt Lake. The sort of like, I felt like I was like this sort of safe, exotic friend. Yeah. Like I was okay. Like that weird, because I knew people and I was there and it was fine. It never came up. Yep. But I could still just always feel this like kind of like, but he's fine. Yeah. Thing.
Oh yeah. It was like, oh yeah, this is Nell. This is Nelini Stamp or whatever they tried to call me. And it was, it would be like, I was okay. And in fact, with some of my friends, like they were like, oh, let me wear this, or like, where'd you get that? And I was like, I wasn't even fashionable then. Like I'm fashionable now. I know that, but I was not fashionable then. Right. But it was more of just like, in their mind, it was like, oh, this means something. Right, I was like, it really doesn't.
Right. Have you experienced much grief in your immediate family?
Oof. I mean, honestly, I didn't really think of, it's like, I talk about this with my friend Sarah Jaffrey. She just wrote this book about grief because her dad died a few years ago. So my grandfather, who I call the father that raised me, because I still give my dad the honor of being my father. Right. But the father who raised me, he died in 2017, like a week after me and my husband decided to get a divorce. Oh. So that was like just grief. Like it was an arc basically. And honestly, it's still kind of happening, but it was like an arc from then. But specifically to 2020, where like the pandemic for me was just like a lot of grief really closely, even if I didn't like in 1 week, my mom's ex-husband, who I called my uncle, died and from COVID, and my aunt died. I didn't really know my aunt. Like I said, I don't really know my dad's siblings, but my mom's ex-husband, like he's, I'm always like, he always used to be like, you could have been mine. And I was like, sure. And he'll always say, oh, you are a daughter. Like he'll call me he used to. And so just watching all of that, and also my purse, I feel like for me, it's not the same, but I think grief is also bigger than just like losing a particular person or a physical being. Like post-COVID, my body changed. And I feel like I grieved the body that I had.
Wow.
And like had to get to know the body that I have now.
Right.
That was pretty wild. But honestly, like a lot of the grief, I have been thankful to not have a bunch of very, very close family members die. It's been a lot of close friends.
Yeah.
And that's been really, really hard in the work that I do in movement. A lot of them, like 2 of my friends, back to back, year after year, killed themselves, committed suicide, one in a very public manner. And then like Erykah Badu like put his words on one of her fashion shows, and it was like super weird. Like all these, because it was in the height of the movement for Black Lives. And so there was like that. He was 23, those types of things. And both of them were my other friend also committed suicide because they felt like they weren't passing enough. And I actually didn't know they were trans until they died. I had no idea. They were like, they are not passing enough. They need top surgery. And I was like, what do you mean? I literally was talking to my other friends being like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And they were like, you didn't know? I was like, no, Adam was always Adam. So just like that, I think friends, especially when they're young, is just like a whole different...
Yeah, it can be harder. And it's sort of, there's a different perspective when it's someone your age or someone you like a peer.
And also someone who takes their own life, I think is like, I didn't go into the questioning of it. As somebody who had a lot of emotional, mental things, I've thought about taking my life in the past, like, and I don't have any like, I've worked through therapy with that, but like, I didn't have any questions, but it was just mostly of just like, I felt then, because it was before even stuff started getting worse politically, I was like, this is only the beginning. And that was the sad part.
Yeah.
Where I was like, this is just the beginning, and there's going to be a lot of young loss over the next like decade. And unfortunately, because these things were a decade ago, like that has been the case.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What is family to you?
I mean, family to me are the folks who are around you that don't actually unconditionally love you. They have a lot of love for you. Because I just think that there's sometimes that people are just going to be like, no, I don't love you right now. And that's okay. And I think that that's totally fine.
Right.
But it's not unconditionally love you. But like if you were in any situation where you actually reached out for real help, would do whatever it is to help you, to support you, and do whatever it is for them at the time, right? Like also not force themselves to commit these big acts. But that's what family is to me. Family is folks that you choose to check in with. Families are folks who you may not talk all the time, but you're all like, wait, I haven't spoken to, like, let me just, and family to me are those who like don't have to agree with on anything. There's that shared experience that won't ever go away, and that you hold for a lifetime. There's this one person in my life who I consider her family, and I will never forget. Like, I just showed up. I was like Steve from Full House, like going in their fridge and eating their food when their mom passed away. But I was just like this, like, I'm gonna take care of these kids. And I just will never forget that, like, their dad was just like, yeah, like, just be with my kids, and like, here, let me pay for your food budget now. You know? And just like, I could just be like, want to go to this? Want to do this? And like, those 2 kids are my family. Like, they're not kids anymore. He's got kids. She's getting married this year, but they're my family, and they always will be.
Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And be sure to check out Identified on YouTube and identifiedpod.com, where you can watch videos from our interviews. Our executive producer is Kiran Banerjee, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.